Welcome to lesson number 3 in our series of lessons on education. In this lesson, we'll be looking at some facts about the U.S. public school system. It's divided into 2 sections. The first section is basically the rest of this page, and it has to do with the demographic kind of data, how many schools, how many teachers, and so forth. The bulk of the lesson will be dealing with factual assessments of student performance, and that's where the disappointments really begin. So let's look at the size of our school systems. America has a very large public school system, about 98,000 public schools, 35,000 private schools. There are 3.2 million teachers in public schools and another 500,000 in private. In 2019, there were 50.8 million students in the public pre-K to 12 classes, with 3.3 million expected to graduate high school in 2019. The average cost per student is $13,400. America's cost per student is 35% greater than the average of the 37 most developed countries, and the total cost for our public schools is $683 billion a year. Today's objective is to give you, in short order, as you can see, I got 26 slides. Is the counter down there? Anyway, I always put how many slides I've got so that you guys can tell, well, how much longer is this guy going to be going? And so it shouldn't take too long. But my objective is to give you a rundown of some of the shortcomings of the U.S. K-12 educational system, and look at the U.S. system with a critical eye. How do international systems compare, and so forth. What I'll be telling you, it's all about teachers, reading, intrinsic motivation, and parenting. Now, I'm not going to be talking about parenting today. I'll be talking about the other 3. Parenting is so complex. In my book, the teachers point out that the reason these kids are disruptive, the root cause of that is the parenting and the culture. And some do it by choice. There were 3 root causes. So to that extent, I'll be talking about parenting. But as you read about how to educate poor children, socioeconomic deprived children, the parents have a huge role in that. And I hate to say it, but many of them don't even come close to fulfilling that role. So here we go, some startling facts. When I started doing my research, instead of 25% of the U.S. high school graduates are functionally illiterate, I wasn't going to use that 19% without knowing where it comes from. I hope I'm like a good New York Times reporter. And I dug for a day and I couldn't find it. Everybody was using 19%, but I couldn't find out where it came from. And finally I found it. There's an organization called the Program for International Assessment of Adult Competence. And they do kids and adults from 16 years to 65 years. And their latest report for 2017 is that 25% of our American high school students are functionally illiterate. They have 5 scales of literacy. To be functionally illiterate, it's a definition that I'm giving it because other people did the same thing. They're either in the first level or below the first level of competence in reading. So think about a quarter of all of our graduates can't really read and follow instructions and things like that. So it's going to be hard for them to take jobs. 38% of them are numerically deficient. They can't do simple math problems and so forth. So that's not a pretty picture. That's not a pretty picture at all. The U.S. Department of Education has a frequently applied assessment of students, and that assessment, you've got 6 curves when I looked at it in my book. You've got reading, 3 curves for 3 different ages, and math for 3 different ages, out from 70 when they started to today's time. They haven't done one recently. They're basically flat. Absolutely no change. Now, statistically, I ran a regression analysis on them, and 5 of those 6 curves had a very slight slope. But if you figured, you take the equation that comes from it and say, how long will it take them to gain another 5 points on their test scores? It could be 100 years. One of them was 300 years. So just because it's got a slope doesn't mean much. What matters is how quickly will change occur. The 2018 program around the world of the Program for International Student Assessments, that's what Schlechter heads up, showed basically that in the last time I talked to you, I said we had mediocre results, and we still have mediocre results. And what I did was to point here, or show you the little pictorial that says, falling short of proficiency, that 12.6% of our children are short on all three levels together when you look at them together. So just another point that, yeah, we've leveled off. It may not be bad if you leveled off at the top, but we didn't level off at the top. We're leveled off well below the top. Again, one of the things I said in my book, I got the data from Public Agenda in Brooklyn, outfit, think tank headed up started by Cyrus Vance and Daniel Yankelovich, who was one of the great survey people. They found that 80% of America's schools have significant losses of time due to misbehaving children. They don't quantify how much. We did in my book, we quantified at least one small school, one group anyway. But there are about 100,000 public schools, so you multiply those two together, that gives you 80,000 schools that have major issues with their children. And when you read the responses of those questionnaires, there are many teachers that say these kids, certain kids, should be absolutely removed from the campus, taken away, just get them out, and they don't do that, of course. They don't do that. So this is a major deterrent for recruiting new teachers. I just talked to somebody last week. Two young ladies came back from student teaching, and they said it was awful. Awful. A friend of mine's daughter was in Teach for America down in New Orleans, and she'd never think about going into teaching because of the way the kids behave. The environment in some classrooms is absolutely deplorable. Now, when I talked last time, I gave a 13-minute movie about a gal who retired or resigned from the Green Bay School Board, and she laid out a litany of profanities and obscene things that happened in her Green Bay school. And she said, I can't do this. I don't feel safe. I'm quitting. So she did that in the public, and it was on YouTube. Let's highlight some points made in the talk. Revisit the competency data. For all the money we spend in America, here is what we get. 25% of our high school students are functionally illiterate. This is not just the graduates, but everybody out in the public. This survey considers everybody from 16 to 65 years old. This basically means that they are unable to read and understand anything but the simplest text. Next, we ask what happened in their journey through the school system. Using the graduation numbers introduced earlier, 3.3 million, that's 825,000 students a year entering our population who basically can't read. 38% of high school graduates are numerically illiterate. This means they are unable to solve the simplest of math problems. There are 1.25 million students like this. Lastly, later, we will see that 33% of our high school graduates are digitally illiterate. That's about another 1.1 million. Most likely, these are all the same students. We ask, how can this be? How can so many move through our schools and not learn more? More on why will unfold as we move into later lessons. Here is more discussion on the U.S. Department of Education's National Assessment of Education Progress exam. There are two graphs associated with each year. I talked about these two graphs. One is in reading and one is in math. These are standard exams given to students aged 9, 13, and 17. This testing format began in 1973, and no exams have been given since 2012. A call to the Department of Education finds they do not plan to test again in this format until 2024. Recall that in this interval, from 1973 to today, we have seen a number of government initiatives aimed at improving student learning. Some of these are No Child Left Behind, Common Core, Excellent Educators for All, and Every Student Succeeds. Based on these assessment exams, none of these programs have had the slightest impact on student success. No appreciable improvement in 47 years. This is a damning indictment of our U.S. Department of Education and its ability to roll out successful programs. The performance on the International PISA exam reflects the same flatline pattern we just discussed. We are certainly in the middle on the pack in these exams. The point about 80,000 schools having so many bad students that it interrupts teaching time will be covered in a later lesson. And to my last point, I say the environment in some classrooms is deplorable. I spend the next entire lesson showing a video of a deplorable school situation. This ends lesson number 3.